Do you know that if it was not for the black man, this war never would have been brought to a close with success to the Union and the liberty to your race? I want you to understand that. Do you know it? Do you know it? 53-year-old Martin Delany, who Lincoln wrote was extraordinary and who thus made him a key African-American field officer in the U.S. Army, was many lifetimes and miles from his hometown of Charlestown, Virginia. He scaled many ambitious peaks between the time he lived in Charlestown and met the history maker, raider of Harper's Ferry, John Brown. As a doctor, a Harvard Medical School student, a novelist, co-editor of the North Star with Frederick Douglass, this moral engine of a man had a motto: act. Act in the living present, but act. Face thine accusers, scorn the rack and rod, and if thou hast truth to utter, speak the truth, and leave the rest to God. In 1823, 11-year-old Martin Delany sat in a wagon with his family and his mother, Patty Delany, a freed African-American, and together they went on a trip to Martinsburg and then crossed the Potomac at Williamsport, Maryland, to freedom and then real freedom in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. They left their hometown because the Delany kids had learned how to read and write using a book called the New York Primer. They then would forge, for their enslaved friends around Charlestown, fake passes permitting them to travel until the law came at the Delany's door. It was time to go. You see, when it came to demon slavery, you beat it best by going. Delany was approached by John Brown in May 1858 at Chatham, Ontario. At a secret convention that Delany helped to organize, Delany and Brown argued on how to best get free. Delany thought Brown underestimated the slave power. Then, history exploded. John Brown and his raiders in October 1859 put out the call for volunteers in the region to join them against enslavement in their plan to capture the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, 10 miles from Delany's own birthplace, Charlestown. Delany knew, and Brown didn't, that African sons and daughters in Charlestown and Harper's Ferry traditionally protested by leaving, much more often than by pulling any trigger. You outsmarted the slave power. You left the owner and overseer by a favorable new moon and a North Star to guide, and leaving them not only beaten, but baffled. In fact, the 1860 slave schedules for Jefferson County containing Harper's Ferry, there were 602 enslaved persons listed as fugitives. They resisted in the most pedestrian way. In fact, the largest of these group escapes of these 602 occurred from farms and mills near Harper's Ferry and along the Shenandoah River to its south. Further evidence suggests that these were planned and assisted escapes. Two freed African Americans, Jacob Freeman and Lawson Goins, were ferry boatmen in 1860 around Harper's Ferry and at the ferry further south for Shannondale Springs, respectively. Moreover, once you were on the east side of the river, perhaps with boatman help, there was within a mile in the woods a freed African-American community called Bushy Ridge that could help in the flight. And the glorious, glamorous spa of Presidents, Shannondale Springs, that boatman Goins ferried folks to? Well, it, as historian Dr. William Terrio has written, was a Whig enclave with strong ties to Baltimore and Washington, where helpers passing for leisure lovers could easily return home clandestinely with their new secret human cargo. When General Nathaniel Banks' Federal Army was swarming over Jefferson County's 212 square miles in April 1862, the enslaved by the thousands emerged from their huts and left the fields to affix themselves to the Federal regiments until the armies had no choice but to bring them to Harper's Ferry and give them work. Federal policies were rewritten to allow what the African Americans wanted. By September 1862, there were 2,000 to 3,000 who had cried, "I am," around Harper's Ferry and under federal protection, albeit short-lived. They were recaptured that month by Confederate General Stonewall Jackson's army and driven again into bondage, but they would kick off their shackles again the following spring when the Federals regained control of the area. And some African-American men who were once born in Jefferson County but who over the years had left, put on the blue coat and joined the United States colored troops to grasp for freedom themselves. In fact, 131 African sons from Jefferson County appeared at recruiting camps all over the eastern states to enlist and then fight, cook, build, guard, and for about 24 die of wounds or disease. Some stayed in the United States colored troops to as late as 1867. After the war, they were reassigned to Texas to represent a show of force when it was believed there would be a change in leadership across the border in Mexico. But sometimes the eternal call of home and the most unforgettable things are deeper than anything else. The landscape, the sense of spring, the moon waxing full, so that even with the threat of hostile treatment, some of these veterans in blue came home to their beautiful, fertile Jefferson County, now called West Virginia, their place of birth, to heal all wounds and one day be buried beside kin and to become of its soil.